I do want to thank everyone for joining today. I am Caitlin Giles McCormick here with the NJEDA. Today's session is the Offshore Wind Workforce and Skills Development Grant Challenge information session. Now, to get us started with the presentation, I will shift things over to our Institute team, starting with Jen Becker, Managing Director at the Wind Institute. Jen?
Thanks, Caitlin. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this informational session on the Offshore Wind Workforce and Skills Development Grant Challenge. As Caitlin said, my name is Jen Becker. I'm Managing Director for the Wind Institute. I'm here with Julia Cortry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Cortry, a manager at the Wind Institute. Looking forward to talking more about the grant and how it fits into our offshore wind economy.
So we're also joined by Kieran Ghosh, who's also part of our Wind Institute team. Kieran, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, please.
Sure.
So just to kind of walk us through today's session, so talk a little bit about the Wind Institute and what we're doing here at EDA. Julia is then going to talk, get some background on offshore wind and our workforce needs, and then I'll walk us through the specifics of the grant challenge that we're here to talk about, and then ending with time to answer any questions and answers that come through the chat. Go to the next slide, please. One more. So New Jersey is creating the Wind Institute for Innovation and Training. This will be a new independent entity that's going to be set up to work to galvanize sort of cross stakeholders, working with all types of stakeholders across government, labor, community groups, academia, and many, many others to really advance our two core objectives as part of our offshore wind strategy here in New Jersey. So the first is to accelerate the development of a robust and diverse offshore wind workforce. And the second is to champion research and innovation that unlocks market potential. Today's session in the Grant Challenge really falls under that first bucket of really making sure that we have training programs in place to support New Jersey residents, being prepared to meet the needs of this offshore wind industry and making sure that we do so in a way that really fosters and drives forward diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as we work to stand up the Wind Institute as an independent entity, we are, NJEDA is staffing that effort. And that's why we're here today as part of EDA. You can go to the next slide, please. So just quickly, just to give some context of what we have been up to and how this grant challenge fits into some of the other work that we have already underway. So as I was mentioning, with sort of the two major buckets of work that we've been up to. The first on research and innovation, which I won't spend too much time on today, but just to kind of share that we are working on a feasibility study for a flagship offshore wind research and testing facility. New Jersey is now part of the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium, a national entity that's fostering research in offshore wind. We've also launched the Wind Institute Fellowship Program, which is also workforce development, but there we are supporting university students led research for 26 undergraduate, master students, and PhD students at Rutgers University, Rowan University, New Jersey Institute of Technology, and Montclair State University. On the workforce side, some of the programs that we have already underway, we've done two grant challenges previously. The first was to establish what's called a Global Wind Organization, or GWO, Basic Safety and Sea Survival Facility. That grant challenge went to Atlantic Cape Community College, who is developing that facility at their Atlantic City campus. Our second grant challenge went to Rowan College of South Jersey, who is now developing a suite of stackable wind turbine technician training programs. We've also done partnerships with some of our vocational schools to support the expansion of their welding and marine coding programs that can prepare high school students and adult learners for jobs in large-scale steel turbine component manufacturing. And we've completed an offshore wind workforce assessment among some other initiatives. The next slide, please. So I'm now going to turn it over to Julia to give you some context about our other larger offshore wind work.
Nice to be back in person. Slide chairs rather than switch screens. So I'm going to give just a little background and context as to kind of what's kind of gone into our thinking around the Workforce Grant Challenge, and the timing and why we're really thinking about preparing our workforce now and supporting these efforts in our communities so that workers are ready to service the offshore wind industry as it emerges in New Jersey. So these are kind of big four themes here around our emerging hub as an offshore wind emerging place for offshore wind. So first, we have incredibly strong political commitment and central location. Governor Murphy has led our efforts to bring offshore wind to New Jersey with 11,000 megawatts of procurement over the next 20 years of offshore wind energy. We're also centrally located in the mid-Atlantic, really at the heart of all of the offshore wind activity and projects, so we're well positioned to service projects up and down the East Coast. And then we've made significant port and supply chain investment as part of our core strategy to support offshore wind supply chain development and have a novel transmission strategy as we work to connect our offshore wind grid, our offshore wind energy to our onshore grid. That is to say, another aspect to make sure that we're prepared to accommodate this huge amount of energy onto our throughout our state, and the Board of Public Utilities will be awarding in the coming weeks and months the results of their procurement on this. But that is to say, the significant workforce opportunities in all of those investments. And then third, to bring it all together, the strong workforce research and innovation, which is where the Wind Institute comes in to support all of those efforts. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, New Jersey is geographically at the center of the U.S. East Coast belt. So you can see up and down the East Coast, there have been a number of projects located off our coast and federal waters, with really the vast majority of those lease areas and lease acreage being off the coast of New Jersey. So really we're in the center of this burgeoning economy. Next slide. I think we are, I think it may have skipped ahead. Okay, there we go. So as part of our strategy to reach up 11,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2040, which we recently expanded from our goal, or increased from our goal of 7.5 gigawatts by 2035, the Board of Public Utilities has set a schedule for awarding these projects, essentially every 2 years through 2040. We have the schedule through 2035, but we'll be getting the next bit of that schedule to get us through 2040, since they've only recently announced that award. But that's to say, we're entering our third solicitation in Q1 of 2023. So there's already been 3 projects awarded through 2 procurement processes, over half or around half of our goal for offshore wind. There's been a number of local content and supply chain commitments like monopile manufacturing or marshaling and manufacturing at our wind port in Salem County, New Jersey. And we're really just at the beginning of the industry in the state. And you can see there's significant times between when the awards are made. You can see 2019 for Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1 project, and it is estimated commercial date of 2024. So there's significant time and planning, as I'll talk about in the subsequent slides. So as we're thinking about workforce opportunities, it's both preparing workers for these first projects, but also thinking long-term of how to prepare workers for this full pipeline and generation of opportunities. Next slide. So offshore wind projects are developed in phases over multiple years. starting with the planning and development stage of 4 to 7 years. So all of our projects right now are in that stage. So when we talk about offshore wind is here in New Jersey, it's happening, it's getting, we're getting ready for everything. We're really in the early years of that planning development. And once developers have gone through that process of making sure that their projects can be successful and have figured out all of the engineering and manufacturing and construction and installation and O&M, et cetera. They move into that manufacturing and assembly phase where they put together all the components of the wind turbines, which takes 1 to 2 years, and then installing those projects in the oceans. It would take 2 to 5 years, depending on the type of infrastructure needed. And then those projects or the offshore wind farms remain in operation for 20 to 30 years and then are finally decommissioned. So as we're thinking about the opportunities for manufacturing and construction and operations and maintenance in particular, want to keep in mind that this framing that there is a long lead time, but like I said, there's a very long lifeline of opportunity. Many of you may be familiar with Ørsted and Atlantic Shores as 2 developers in New Jersey. But if you haven't heard, there are 5 new developers that have entered the industry after winning leases off the coast of New York and New Jersey this past February. So those developers are Vineyard Mid-Atlantic, Ocean Winds East, Attentive Energy, and Community Offshore Wind, and Invenergy. So when we're thinking about construction opportunities or manufacturing or other contracting and subcontracting opportunities, it's important to remember that there's a growing body of developers and projects and new voices that'll be entering and as they're looking into this 3rd solicitation and maybe looking for partners or other supply chain supports. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, ports are one of our key parts of our offshore wind strategy. So we've made significant investments into New Jersey ports. And there are 3 types of major ports in offshore wind. So first being manufacturing. So the EWs, monopile fabrication facilities, so they'll be building the foundations for wind turbines in Paulsboro. And then there'll be nacelles being assembled at the New Jersey Windport, which is our crown jewel investment in Salem County, Lower Alloys Creek. This facility also has space for additional manufacturing and marshaling, where both Ørsted and Atlantic Shores plan to marshal their projects, their New Jersey projects, from the port for installation. They transport the turbines to the wind farm for their installation and operations. And then third, there are operations and maintenance ports. So these are where during the operations the lifespan of the wind farm, so that 20 to 30 years, this is kind of the hub for developers and manufacturers to maintain, service, repair, and make sure that everything continues operating well in their at their wind farms. So Atlantic Shores and Ørsted have both selected Atlantic City as their site for their O&M facilities. And then we've identified in the map to the right of a number of other areas where we could see future manufacturing operations and maintenance activities as well. Next slide, please. So you may have heard in the last few weeks, we released a workforce gap analysis that identified or made projections on the job opportunities and job needs for offshore wind in New Jersey. This analysis actually went through 2035. So this is just a snapshot of 2030, one of the peak years of where we would be with offshore wind jobs and opportunities. So in 2030, we expect to see 20,000 new jobs in several industries to service New Jersey projects and regional projects up and down the coast. So you can see most of that activity is in manufacturing as well as construction. And then you can also see the induced industries of additional activity. Next slide, please. So just to break it down a little bit more, 40% of new offshore wind jobs in New Jersey will be in production occupations, followed by installation and repair, transportation, and construction. So as we started to look more deeply at the job needs and the gaps, we identified several occupations that we would need to grow significantly to support the industry, which have helped inform and partially be the impetus for this workforce grant challenge. Jen will talk about more in a second, and you'll also find in Appendix A of our guidance document on the grant challenge, more information as we talk about what type of occupations the grant challenge is. Next slide, please. So that's all from my end. You know, lots to talk about in terms of offshore wind workforce needs and how we can support the industry. But hope this provides a good framing for you know, how we've thought about the grant challenge and why we've set up the way that we have. So I'll pass it along to Jen. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. So really excited to get into the details of the Offshore Wind Workforce and Skills Development Grant Challenge, the challenge that you all have come to hear more about. So it's a new competitive grant opportunity focused on developing and expanding workforce training programs that prepare New Jerseyans for jobs in offshore wind. There's a total of $3.725 million in funding available. And individual awards can range from a minimum of $100,000 up to a maximum of $1 million. And we expect to make multiple awards through this challenge. So detailed information about the grant challenge can be found at the URL there. And I believe Caitlin's going to drop that into the chat. And you'll be able to find, actually the recording of this webinar will be posted at that URL as well. Go to the next slide, please. So digging in onto the particulars and eligible applicants. So this grant challenge is open to all entities that can design and execute workforce and skills training programs. So it's a pretty broad list that includes, but not limited to, community-based organizations, labor unions, technical high schools, community colleges, other nonprofit organizations, private companies, etc. And so we are definitely encouraging collaborations, but EDA will only enter into a grant agreement with the primary applicant. So we'll talk a little bit more the next slide about the types of entities to be involved. We'll go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, one of the core objectives of the Wind Institute and of the state overall, as we build up our workforce in offshore wind, is to make sure that we're doing so in a way that really drives forward diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so one of the ways that we're doing that through this grant challenge is that we are requiring that all applications must include at least one community-based organization that has demonstrated experience serving a New Jersey overburdened community as defined by New Jersey's environmental justice law. So the CBO can be the primary applicant, or it can be an applicant team member, but all applicants must have at least one of these types of organizations. And the CBO must have a defined role that aligns with our mission and our services, and have a portion of the grant request that aligns with that role. So it's not okay for a primary applicant just to say they're going to work in some way with this potential CBO. We really want to see who that CBO is and see what their role on the proposed program is, and how much funding that's being requested will be going to that CBO. We want to make sure that the community-based organization is a real sort of defined role on the program. Again, the CBO can be the primary applicant or the an applicant team member. You can go to the next slide, please. So for the purposes of this challenge, a CBO is defined as a 501c3 nonprofit organization and an organization that provides direct services or supports to a specific geographic New Jersey community or communities, or specific segments of a New Jersey community or communities. And so for the purpose of this challenge, the following are not considered CBOs. government entities, K through 12 schools, and institutions of higher learning. Now, these organizations, they were listed in the eligible applicants. They absolutely can be primary applicants, and they absolutely can be members of an applicant team, but they wouldn't meet the requirement of the CBO for this particular challenge. Go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the CBO, it's not just any CBO, it's a community-based organization that's serving a New Jersey overburdened communities as defined by New Jersey's environmental justice law. And that law defines overburdened communities as a census block group in which there's one of these three criteria. At least 35% of the households qualify as low income. At least 40% of the residents identify as minority or as members of a state recognized tribal community, or at least 40% of the households have limited English proficiency. And you can find a map of New Jersey's overburdened communities at the URL that's listed on the slide that Caitlin will be dropping into the chat. So if there's any, you want to check, okay, I'm a CBO and I work with this community, but I'm not sure if I meet the criteria per New Jersey's environmental justice law, you can find that information in that map. You can go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that we want to do, and because we are having this requirement and because we're encouraging collaborations through this grant challenge, we are offering an optional way for all of you to connect. And so on our grant challenge webpage, you will find what we're calling an optional potential collaborator form. And this really supports all of you people on the webinar today who are interested in applying or becoming a member of a team, maybe not as a primary applicant, to connect with one another. So there's a pretty simple form on the web page that you can download. And if you submit one to us by Thursday, October 20th, then a set of all completed forms will be sent back to you. So if you if you raise your hand and say, yes, I'm interested in one way or another and want to put my name and contact information out there for people to reach me or for me to do the same, you can submit that form. If you don't submit a form, you're not going to get the package of completed forms back. So you have to submit it in order to get the information back. Submitting the form has absolutely no bearing on the evaluation. This is purely optional. In the years past, you would have pre-bid conferences where people would be in the same room. We're doing this virtual webinar today. This is a way for you to make those connections if you want to see who you might want to partner with for this grant challenge. But again, it has no bearing on the evaluation. It is purely optional. But if you are interested, you do need to submit it by Thursday, October 20th, and email it to windinstitute@njeda.com. And that information is on the webpage and on the form itself. One other thing I just want to note on the form is that we are going to get them in. We will send them out. EDA is not verifying the information. We want to get this information out to you quickly. It's really just a resource for you all to connect with others who you might want to collaborate with for this grant challenge. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so focusing on the scope of work. So the scope of work for this grant challenge is to develop or expand a program that will allow New Jerseyans to access workforce opportunities in the offshore wind industry. So this is really about providing tangible skill development and or job readiness training. So as part of the proposals, I have to have compelling plans to engage with industry and other stakeholders to design and implement the program that prepares participants for the job opportunities in offshore wind, to develop and or utilize outreach and recruitment practices or program design approaches and wraparound supports that really foster a diverse and inclusive pool of training participants to not just to enroll in the program, but to successfully complete the program and to execute the project efficiently and on schedule, achieving well-defined milestones. So I can go to the next slide, please. So building on sort of what Julia was talking about before in the workforce assessment that we did, looking at the occupations that are a combination of jobs that in high numbers we see that we're going to be needing, or occupations where we see that we have a pretty significant gap and we need to prioritize our training resources in the near term. So all the applications must address one or more of these particular standard occupation code categories. So those are operations specialty managers, construction trade workers, extraction workers, and so on. I'm not going to read all of them on the screen, but you will find on the web page for the grant challenge, as well as in a document that we have called application guidelines that gives more details on the particular occupations within each of these categories. So you will see these are predominantly production-based occupations, construction-based occupations, transportation-based occupations, the ones that are sort of rising to the list in terms of the occupations that we're going to be needing, and all the ones that we see that we have a current gap on. So all of that information can be found on the grant challenge page, and the workforce assessment that has more details on this that Julia was mentioning before is on our Wind Institute page. Go to the next slide, please. So now turning to the grant amount and the eligible costs. So as I mentioned before, it's a grant pool of $3.725 million. Individual awards can range from a minimum of $100,000 to a maximum of $1 million. And it's a pretty wide range of costs that are eligible for the grant funding. So it can cover planning, so staff costs for program development and program design, the soft launch, so outreach, recruitment materials and related costs, capital costs, procurement, construction, equipment, things along those lines. And then of course, implementation, so instructor time, facility fees, participant materials, and delivery of support services. So no more than 10% of the grant amount can be used on indirect costs, and indirect costs are general administration or general operating expenses for the applicant organization. And then very important to note that programs must comply with prevailing wage and affirmative action requirements. Go to the next slide, please. So the grant will be dispersed in according to 3 milestones, and that these would be detailed in the grant agreement. Now, as a reminder, as I mentioned, we're absolutely encouraging collaborations, although not requiring them. So except for the CBO serving an overburdened community requirement, but EDA will only enter into a grant agreement with the primary applicant. And so the grant will be dispersed in 3 phases to the primary applicant. So the first is 50% upon execution of the grant agreement, 25% upon submission of the mid-program report, and these milestones would be outlined in the grant agreement, and then 25% upon launch of the program or completion of the grant period. So we recognize that some of the programs that will come through in the application process and that might be selected will be for brand new programs, and so a big portion of the initial period of time is going to be in that program development phase. And so this grant is really gearing up to the launch of the program. For programs that are expanding an existing program or building on an existing program, or perhaps that lead up and design time is shorter, the grant agreement can be set up so that it's a completion of the grant period. So if there's certain milestones that are part of the application to be met, we would match the final disbursement to that milestone. Go to the next slide, please. So the application for the grant challenge is currently under development. We do not actually have a set date just yet for when the application will be open and closing, and that will be announced in the coming months. However, we wanted to make sure to get the word out sooner than later so that groups can start thinking about the programs that they have in mind that they want to put forward, that they can start connecting with potential collaborators through that collaboration form or otherwise. So to get you thinking, again, we have this informational webinar today, and then on the Grant Challenge webpage, as I mentioned, there is a PDF that's called Application Guidance, and it walks through actually a lot of the information that I'm going over today, but it also gives the specific questions that applicants will need to answer as part of the application once the specific format is set and that application opens. So you'll have all that information up front that you can start working through and thinking through. There will also be a number of documents that will be required as part of the application. That includes a tax clearance certificate, the primary applicant's organizational formation documents, a program budget using our template, which is also an Excel template is available on our grant challenge page. Applicants will also need to submit a signed letter from the applicant's community-based organization confirming their role, or if the primary applicant is the CBO serving the overburdened community, confirming their status as such. So again, this is really want to make sure that that CBO role is very defined and aligned on the roles between all involved. And then the narrative responses to the questions that are outlined in the application guidance that I was just mentioning. We can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of evaluation, proposals will be scored on 5 major criteria. Ability to meet the needs of the offshore wind industry, ability to serve New Jersey's overburdened communities, ability to provide wraparound supports and affordable training, prior experience and ability to implement the program, and the resources required. So the highest possible score is 100 points, and the minimum score required to be considered for an award is 80 points. So we're going to dig into each of these criteria a little bit more. If you can go to the next slide, please. So for that first criteria, the ability to meet the needs of the offshore wind industry, which is worth 35 points in the evaluation, it's actually broken down into two core components. So the first is for evaluating the applications, detailing a compelling and innovative program to fulfill a workforce need for the offshore wind industry. Again, that's addressing one or more of the 10 occupational categories that I mentioned before. And then second, to outlines a clear strategy to engage industry employers. The second criteria is the ability to serve New Jersey's overburdened communities. So this evaluation is in addition to the CBO. Now the CBO's role can certainly play a big part in the approach to recruit and serve members of overburdened communities, but this is part of the evaluation in addition to that requirement of the CBO on the team, and that's worth 10 points. The third criteria is the ability to provide wraparound supports and affordable training, and that's broken down into 2 sub-criteria. So clearly defining the wraparound supports that are needed and the approach to provide these services, and to outline an approach to offer affordable training to participants. You can go to the next slide, please. The fourth criteria is the applicant and the applicant team's prior experience and the team's ability to implement the program. So we're looking at this in a few different ways. So one is the applicant, and I'll just say applicant team is sort of inclusive of all of the team members' organizations on the team if there is more than one. The applicant team's track record of related experiences operating workforce development programs, that the team has the qualifications and experience required to implement the program. You have to put forward as part of your application an implementation plan that has specific milestones. So we'll be evaluating if that implementation plan is a realistic one, including strategies to mitigate any challenges that are anticipated. And then describing an approach to conduct ongoing program evaluation and improvement. And then lastly, the last set of criteria is the resources required. Now I want to be clear that the evaluation is not based on the dollar amount that is requested. So it's not if you request a $100,000 grant as opposed to $100,001 that you're going to get. The points for that will be different. We're really looking at how realistic the budget is, and does that match the proposal and implementation plan. So this is really about the suitability and how realistic the budget is, and that is worth a total of 10 points. Go to the next slide, please. So we are accepting questions and outside of this informational webinar, we are also accepting questions and answers, and they have to be done in writing, can be sent via email only to windinstitute@njeda.com. Please have all emails for that with the subject line questions-New Jersey Offshore Wind Workforce Grant Challenge. So a final due date for those questions will be posted within 2 weeks of a question deadline. So We'll give ample notification that a due date is coming for questions within 2 weeks. And so that will be posted to the website. And we'll be answering these on a rolling basis, and we'll post them on the Grant Challenge webpage. So check back on to that webpage periodically. As we get more questions, we'll be answering them and adding them to the webpage for everyone to see. And I will just note, you can, the types of questions, that you can ask in there if you are unsure, if you are, would meet the criteria of a CBO serving an overburdened community. That is something that you can put forward in the email Q&A. Opening it up to Q&A for the information sessions. You just give Julia and I a second here.
First question, are you eligible if your occupation is not listed on Appendix A and your trade will be working on these projects?
So this particular grant challenge, only the occupations that are listed in Appendix A are the ones that are eligible for this grant challenge. Now, job readiness training, so if it's sort of pre-skill development, but leading to, supporting those types of occupations, that's eligible. But something that is, not on the list would not be eligible for this particular grant challenge. But as Julia had indicated before, this is there's many different types of jobs needed in offshore wind across a very long timeline. So we anticipate having additional grant challenges in the future as well to support other types of training programs. But this particular grant challenge, you do need to propose a program that addresses one or more of those categories that are listed.
Second question, are veterans considered an eligible population? So I think this may be just to clarify around overburdened communities and which populations, or what are our target populations here?
Sure. So absolutely, veterans are an eligible population. We are putting a focus on overburdened communities, and I will say that veterans, having veterans as residents in a particular community does not meet the criteria for an overburdened community. The program, we have this focus on overburdened communities, but it doesn't have to be, the program doesn't have to be exclusive to overburdened communities. So, but we have, the overburdened communities part, it really shows up, I think, in two core ways. So one is having the CBO serving an overburdened community as part of the applicant team, and then the 10 points in the evaluation criteria. But, you can have a program that meets the needs of other communities and other populations as well. And we certainly welcome that. We just want to also put a focus on our overburdened communities.
And then I think a similar question, can you define what an eligible population segment would be as opposed to an overburdened community? So I think specifically they're trying to understand, will the grant allow applications to support specific populations within an overburdened community?
So if I understand the question correctly, the answer is yes. So we are, again, just sort of putting a focus on overburdened communities, but not exclusive to overburdened communities. So absolutely, they could have a proposal that digs in even a more narrower population, if that's the proposal that the applicant wants to put forward.
There are several questions around collaborators, and I've responded to many of the questions by putting in the collaborator form. So if you're interested in being a collaborator, if you've raised your hand, metaphorically on this, want to encourage you, though you are not required, to fill out the collaborator form so we can make sure that that is how we will collect everyone's information that's interested in sharing it with others. And then a related question, in terms of, so in terms of collaborator opportunities, I think this is asking about the dynamic or what the role a collaborator may play if they're not the primary applicant. So they're saying if the entity chooses a collaborator, or should they be completing the application together with the entity as the primary applicant? if the primary applicant wins the grant with the collaborator, will the institute communicate the grant amount so that there's a level playing field over transparency and allocation of fair pay to the collaborator?
So if I miss any of those, please let me know. But so as part of the budget template and as part of the application narrative questions, the primary, so let me actually take a step back. So the primary applicant should be the one who is actually uploading the application. We anticipate that if you have collaborators, that you are working together to develop that application, but that is, that's not a requirement. That's just sort of the, I think a working assumption, if you will, that if you're coming together as collaborators, you're working through what different organizations' roles are. As part of the budget template and the description that would need to be included in the application, a primary applicant needs to list out who their collaborators are that are receiving grant funding. So again, we're really trying to, if you're collaborating, we want these to be real collaborations, that if, you can't just say, oh, I'm gonna work with so-and-so and then, later on decide not to. This is, we really want to sort of see the, how the grant funding would be dispersed through collaborators. If there are collaborators, again, it's not required except for the fact of the CBO being part of the team. I think there was another question in there, about the communication out. So no, our expectations is that we would be communicating only to the primary applicant. That is the entity that we will be entering into the grant agreement, and then in turn, the primary applicant would be working with with their collaborating teams.
So we've got a few questions around implementation and outcomes. So do you have expectations for the number of participants engaged, enrolled, graduated, and placed?
We have not set requirements for any of those. That should be part of anyone's application and showcasing their ability to meet the needs of the offshore wind industry.
So we've got a number of questions from someone. So I think these are just a kind of general around priority and what we're hoping to see. So one around, what is the focus of workforce training? Workers, technicians, engineers, pre-college, college. Is there a particular target that we have of the type of job or occupation?
So the types of occupations that we are focused on for this particular challenge is in that Appendix A. So those 10 categories all have then are sort of broken down into additional occupations that fall into them. So all that information is on the web page, on the website under the Appendix A.
And then is it encouraged that several universities and colleges form a team and submit a joint proposal? Do we have a viewpoint on what type of collaborations we would like to see?
So we are not requiring anything in terms of the collaborations other than that one requirement that I've already mentioned. It is up to the applicants to decide whether they want to come together for a proposal or do things separately. So that is all for potential applicants to consider. That's another reason why we are providing this opportunity to, basically raise your hand and say, I'm interested if you are looking to connect with others. But that's for, each entity to decide upon themselves.
And then we're looking for, are we able to provide examples of what a community-based organization is? I know we have some guidance in our document, and then similarly, what are wraparound supports?
All right. So in terms of examples of community-based organizations, I don't want to name any particular organizations to indicate anything more than as an example. What we've done is sort of outline the definition of a community-based organization pretty clearly, as well as examples of what for this particular challenge, what we are not considering a community-based organization. So that information, again, has been shared in this webinar and then on the webpage as well. In terms of wraparound supports, that's sort of an umbrella term for services that are provided or needed for participants to successfully engage and complete the training program. So it can absolutely vary. We haven't required particular ones, but it could be, you know, providing transportation or childcare, or providing equipment, you know, or specialized clothing that a participant would need to participate in the training program. So things along those lines. And in our application guidance, we do list out a few examples in there as well.
And then what does it mean to engage industry employers? So what are our expectations for engagement?
We haven't listed out specific, you know, specific expectations in that. We have phrased it as that applicants need to detail a compelling plan to engage in employers. So I think it can really vary depending on the program that you're proposing and the stage at which the program is. So, you know, all of this, you know, I don't think anybody wants to develop a training program, have people go through a training program and then not have a positive job outcome at the end. So we want to see that these programs are being designed in a way that are meeting the needs of the industry and preparing people for that. So we don't have specifics on that, but we do want to see how the plan to engage with industry employers.
And then we have a number of questions around deadlines and implementation. So first, when do we expect the deadline for this grant application?
I don't have a date yet, but as soon as we do, that will be posted on our webpage. There will be a notice of funding availability issued, and there will be you know, time between the announcement of it and the deadline. But I don't have a date just yet for you.
And then in terms of our implementation plan, are we looking for a 1-year or a 5-year plan, or do we have a viewpoint on the number of years in implementation?
So we have decided to keep that open for the applicant to propose. Again, looking at what sort of the overall approach that the applicant is taking to meet the need of the industry, to develop the program, and so we have left that open in terms of the ultimate timeline. But we do want to see you know, a specific implementation plan with specific milestones listed in the application.
Are student stipends authorized as a part of the budget?
I believe that we would allow that, but let me circle back on that, and we will post that as part of the Q&A. That's posted on our webpage.
And then I think a similar, so I think a number of questions around usage of the monies. So if we're in an area that has a target population but is far away from trainers, can transportation and virtual training be part of the application?
Yes, so transportation is definitely part of the, you know, wraparound supports, if you will, that are eligible for the grant funding to support. And virtual training is also eligible, and this is listed in the application guidelines that if you're proposing a virtual training, we really want to make sure that it's a training that's geared towards New Jersey residents and that has a tailored approach to connecting New Jersey residents to that training.
So there are some questions around verification of overburdened communities. So we'll be checking with, or how will we be confirming that the CBO is actually working in the community? For example, would we check with the city council?
We've not outlined the specific expectations to check with a city council. I think we would do our looking into the CBO, and as part of the application, the CBO will have the primary applicant, whether that's the CBO or otherwise, would have to describe sort of the CBO's experience and their as part of the application. So that would all those sort of qualifications would have to be included in the application.
So I think another question, or we have several 501c3 questions. Does it matter if you are designated as a 501c3 or 501c6 or maybe another type of 501c?
So only for the purposes of one requirement about the CBO serving an overburdened community, that has to be a 501c3. However, other 501 designated organizations are absolutely eligible to apply and be the primary applicant, or be another member of the applicant team.
And then if you're a newer CBO, let's say you don't have a track record or experience in workforce training and development, but you have the knowledge and skills, they're asking specifically if the CBO would, or the 501c3 would be penalized, or how would we evaluate the 501c3 based on what they're doing compared to what this grant maybe will enable them to do.
So again, just to clarify for the 501c3, that definition is solely tied to the definition for the community-based organization for this particular challenge. So the primary applicant is not a 501c3, that's okay. When we are looking as part of the evaluation for the prior experience and ability to implement the program, that's 30 points. And so we are looking, as I said before, that's like the applicant team, right? So if you're an organization that really doesn't have a track record, but you have other members on your team that do, and you can explain sort of how that collaboration is taking place, and so that you're leveraging the expertise from the various team members, that would be part of the evaluation for the collective team's track record.
Is an organization servicing youth in an overburdened community regarded as a CBO? Would that be a potential example?
Yes, that would be an example. So again, I didn't say this before, but I definitely will say this now. We have not prescribed what the role of the CBO should be on the applicant team, right? So certainly if the CBO is the primary applicant, would expect that they're sort of taking a leadership role in the design and implementation of the program. But if the CBO is a member on the applicant team, they might have a very specific role. It could be part of the skills training. It could be one of the wraparound supports or something else. But the work that the CBO is doing, their mission, we've left that very open-ended. It's just that they, to meet the requirement, you have to be serving an overburdened community. But if you're serving youth in that overburdened community, that's absolutely fine.
Can an industry employer apply for a grant? Can they be the primary applicant?
Yes. Private companies are eligible. But again, you would have to have a CBO, a New Jersey CBO serving a New Jersey overburdened community as part of your applicant team.
And then another eligible applicant question: do you need to be a New Jersey-based group for this implementation, and do you need to be based in regional areas?
So as part of the application, you'd have to show your tax clearance certificate and be registered to do business in New Jersey, but the primary applicant doesn't necessarily need to be headquartered in New Jersey. But again, that is also part of the reason why we want to have make sure that there's a local community group as part of the applicant team to make sure that this is very tailored to New Jersey residents.
Were returning citizens, persons with criminal convictions, eligible or considered an overburdened population?
So returning citizens are absolutely eligible as, as the target population for the training program, but returning citizens is not part of the criteria per New Jersey's environmental justice law for an overburdened community. So again, want to sort of distinguish between that you can have a program that is targeted towards a particular segment of the population in and outside an overburdened community, but we want to have some connection to an overburdened community or overburdened communities, and there is where we see the CBO helping to make that connection, as well as other approaches that the applicant might put forward as part of their narrative that would be part of the evaluation. So a long answer to say yes to the returning citizens as a target population.
So we calculate 20,000 jobs in 2030. And they're asking, how many jobs do you believe will be available in the offshore wind industry from 2023 to 2025? So we'll put in the chat a link to our workforce gap analysis that talks about the on-ramp or the increase over time in job opportunities. And I think if there were additional questions on some of the exact job calculations, it can be submitted through our Q&A. You can formally respond in that way. And then I think we've answered this in other ways around the timeline of the grant from award to completion and how many months. Do we have anything more we'd like to say there?
No, we are leaving that to the proposal. So we have not set an established timeline.
Should the proposal aim to serve the whole state of New Jersey, or can it aim to serve part of New Jersey, for example, North Jersey or another subregion?
So I'll take out the word should in that question. We are not dictating that. So a proposal can, if it provides opportunity and access to the whole state, that's great. But if the program is tailored to a specific area of the state, that is okay too. Again, in the context of meeting all the other requirements that we've outlined and developing compelling plans per the evaluation criteria.
So we have 2 minutes left, and I've got one more question in the queue. So I want to encourage folks, if you have other questions, to make sure to type them into the chat. So our current last question: are there limitations in the hiring of returning citizens in this workforce? And that is dependent on the type of occupation or where they're working and the type of conviction that they may have. So, for example, folks who work at a port may need to acquire a TWIC card, which means that they cannot have not have been convicted of certain crimes or felonies, or there may need to be a certain time period before they may qualify. So it is dependent on the exact role, the location of the role, and probably the employer themselves. If there are specific scenarios or questions beyond that, it may be helpful to put directly into our written Q&A, and we can respond further there. And I guess to summarize that, there are definitely jobs that will be limited because of ability to get a TWIC card or other certifications. And then I think there are other ones where it may be more nuanced based on the employer discretion or the workplace expectations. We have another question. So are unions able to apply if they are a 501c3?
So again, unions can apply. Labor unions are part of the eligible applicants, and we'll definitely make sure we are very explicit in our written Q&A, because it does seem like there's some confusion. You do not need to be a 501c3 to apply for this grant. The only requirement is that all applicants need to have a CBO serving a New Jersey overburdened community as part of their applicant team. And that is defined. That particular organization is defined as a 501c3 serving a New Jersey overburdened community, with further detail as outlined before. So again, the type of applicants that are eligible to apply for this grant challenge as a primary applicant is pretty wide and varied. So that 501c3 designation is purely just for that one requirement for the CBO. So again, a labor union can apply, but you have to have a New Jersey CBO as part of your applicant team.
That's all the questions we've received. We are at time, so maybe we can give a few seconds if you have any other questions. Otherwise, you can see in the chat, Kieran has linked to or provide information on how to submit written comments, so directly via email through winninstitute@njeda.com, and using the subject line questions New Jersey Offshore Wind Workforce Grant Challenge. as we noted, and want to reiterate, there's several questions. Sorry for the background going in and out. We'll be sending all of this information will be posted on our website. The recording will be posted on YouTube, and all information can be found at the Workforce Grant Challenge link that's in the chat. And if there are any other questions, again, please submit via email. It looks like we have not received any other questions in our Q&A. So I think we can close.
Just want to thank everybody for taking the time to learn more about the grant challenge. We're really excited and thrilled to be offering this opportunity and to work together to develop New Jersey's offshore wind workforce. So thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.